Hello, Midnights. You are listening to your favorite bedtime stories. Next up, the mystery of Long Island, Preston Nichols and the Montauk Project. We hope you enjoy our stories. Let us know where you are tuning in from. And while you're here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps keeping these stories coming. Thank you. At the absolute easternmost tip of Long Island, New York, lies a geographic location that commands a nearly legendary status within modern popular culture and the global landscape of conspiracy theories. This is Montauk Point, the historic home of Camp Hero, a former military installation of the United States Armed Forces. To the casual observer, or the weekend hiker, the abandoned base appears as a quiet, weathering relic of the Cold War, dominated by the colossal, rusting framework of a massive radar dish that cuts an ominous silhouette against the Atlantic sky. Yet behind the heavily barricaded gates and beneath the wind-swept, sandy soil, a far more sinister narrative is said to exist. According to the chief architects of one of the most intricate and vast conspiracy theories of the 20th century, this decommissioned base was the cradle of a highly classified, deeply unethical research program known to history as the Montauk Project. The man who single-handedly thrust this astonishing narrative into the public consciousness, and whose very name remains permanently intertwined with the paranormal folklore of Long Island, was Preston B. Nichols. An electrical engineer by trade and a self-proclaimed researcher of parapsychology, Nichols opened a literal Pandora's box in the early 1990s. He stepped forward with a shocking claim that he had successfully recovered deeply repressed, technologically wiped memories of his own extensive involvement in groundbreaking, terrifying experiments. These operations, he asserted, pushed far beyond the boundaries of conventional science, entering the realms of temporal manipulation, physical teleportation, and total electromagnetic mind control. His explosive accounts, which eventually coalesced into a highly successful multi-part series of books, constructed a bizarre yet mesmerizing universe that completely blurred the lines between science fiction, clandestine military operations, and profound psychological horror. Today, this narrative is deeply familiar to millions of people worldwide, though many consume it without ever knowing its true origin. The detailed testimonies of Preston Nichols served as the literal direct blueprint for one of the most successful mystery and science fiction television series in modern streaming history, Stranger Things. The striking, unmistakable parallels between the claims of this eccentric engineer and the supernatural occurrences surrounding the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana, are not mere creative coincidences. Instead, they represent a direct, conscious adaptation of a modern American mythos that began on the rocky shores of Montauk. To truly comprehend the sheer scale of the Montauk Project and its subsequent transformation into a cornerstone of global entertainment, one must meticulously analyze the life, background, and complex personality of Preston B. Nichols. Born on May 24th, 1946, on Long Island, Nichols spent the entirety of his formative years and adult life in a region that was profoundly shaped by the American defense infrastructure during the height of the Cold War. He was not a typical outsider lacking technical literacy. On the contrary, Nichols possessed a highly sophisticated, deeply practical understanding of radio frequency engineering, acoustics, and advanced electronics. Throughout his public life, he claimed to hold multiple academic degrees in fields ranging from electrical engineering and psychology to parapsychology. Though mainstream investigative journalists and skeptical researchers would later challenge the validity of these institutional credentials. During the 1970s and 1980s, Nichols was officially employed by several prominent defense contractors and high-tech research institutions situated across Long Island. Most notable among these were the Airborne Instruments Laboratory, widely known as AIL, and his intermittent loose professional associations with the nearby Brookhaven National Laboratory. His legitimate, day-to-day employment involved the development of advanced radar systems, the study of electromagnetic compatibility, and the refining of sophisticated electronic warfare and eavesdropping technologies. Yet, beneath his conventional professional exterior lay a profound, consuming obsession with how high-power electromagnetic fields interacted with the complex biological systems of the human brain and nervous system. This fascination led him deep into the realm of psychotronics, a term coined to describe the hypothetical technology of using electronic devices to alter, manipulate, or interface with human consciousness. In addition to his professional career, Nichols was an avid, almost compulsive collector and restorer of decommissioned military surplus electronics. His private residence in Westbury, Long Island, was transformed over the decades into a surreal, overwhelming electronic sanctuary. He hoarded literally tons of obsolete military hardware, industrial oscilloscopes, high-power radio transmitters, and massive radar components that he legally purchased from government surplus auctions. Friends, neighbors, and casual visitors described his home as a claustrophobic mad scientist laboratory where thick bundles of coaxial cables snaked through hallways like industrial vines. It was precisely this unique confluence of genuine technical expertise, unfettered access to military-grade broadcasting components, and a lifelong obsession with the fringes of paranormal science that created the perfect psychological and material breeding ground for his later revelations. Preston Nichols passed away on October 5, 2018, at the age of 72, but the colossal mythology he spent his later years manufacturing would outlive him, transitioning from the pages of obscure conspiracy literature into the bright lights of Hollywood. The grand narrative of the Montauk Project does not begin in the 1970s, amidst the dense forests of Long Island, but rather in the darkest, most desperate days of the Second World War within the heavily guarded confines of the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. In his extensive writings, Preston Nichols brilliantly anchored his new claims to an already famous, deeply entrenched piece of American folklore, the Philadelphia Experiment of 1943. Officially designated by conspiracy theorists as Project Rainbow, this alleged secret naval operation sought to apply the theoretical principles of unified field theory to practical warfare. The objective was to utilize incredibly powerful, precisely modulated electromagnetic fields generated by massive onboard coils to bend light and radar waves around a naval vessel, rendering the destroyer escort ship, the USS Eldridge, completely invisible to enemy forces. According to the elaborate lore expanded upon by Nichols and his subsequent ideological allies, the experiment succeeded far too well, breaking the fundamental laws of known physics and spiraling into an unmitigated catastrophe. The USS Eldridge did not merely become invisible to the naked eye or enemy radar, it physically vanished from its mooring berth in a strange, shimmering greenish fog. The ship was instantly teleported through a tear in the fabric of space-time, appearing hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, before materializing back in Philadelphia moments later. The physical and psychological toll on the crew members was catastrophic. Sailors materialized from the temporal jump in states of complete emotional dissolution, descending into permanent madness. Others caught fire spontaneously, while the most horrifying cases involved crew members whose physical bodies had literally fused at the molecular level with the solid steel hull of the ship during rematerialization, terrified by the horrific, unpredictable spiritual and physical consequences of the test. The United States Navy abruptly canceled Project Rainbow and classified all surviving data under the highest levels of national security. However, the brilliant scientific minds tasked with overseeing the Philadelphia experiment, figures who, according to Nichols, included legendary mathematical and physical giants such as John von Neumann and even Nikola Tesla prior to his passing, refused to abandon the underlying technology. They realized that they had accidentally unlocked a profound truth. The manipulation of massive electromagnetic fields could warp the very structure of human consciousness and space-time itself. Because the conventional Navy refused to fund further experiments that resulted in the horrific mutilation of its active duty sailors, the project was quietly absorbed by a highly secretive parallel network within the military-industrial complex and the burgeoning intelligence community during the 1950s. This shadow group required a completely isolated, secure, and state-of-the-art facility where they could continue to experiment on human subjects using high-power radiation, entirely insulated from civilian oversight or democratic accountability. A rigorous geographic search led them to the windswept cliffs of eastern Long Island, the Montauk Air Force Station, historically known to locals as Camp Hero. The strategic selection of Camp Hero as the central hub for this newly revitalized, deeply clandestine research program was a masterstroke of military planning. Geographically remote, surrounded on three sides by the churning waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the Long Island Sound, and blanketed by dense, treacherous forests, the base offered an unparalleled degree of natural camouflage. Originally established during World War II as a coastal defense battery to protect the vital shipping lanes leading into New York Harbor, Camp Hero had been meticulously constructed to resemble a quaint, harmless fishing village from the air, a clever deception designed to mislead scouting German U-boats. The massive concrete gun bunkers were camouflaged as ordinary wooden cottages, and the entire base was hardwired for absolute operational secrecy. During the height of the Cold War, the facility received a massive technological upgrade. The military installed a gargantuan, state-of-the-art radar system known as the NFPS-35. This monumental radar system, featuring a reflector dish weighing dozens of tons, was designed specifically to detect incoming Soviet nuclear bombers at extreme ranges. It operated within the ultra-high frequency band, specifically transmitting at a frequency of 425 MHz. It was this specific frequency that captured the attention of Preston Nichols. Through his independent engineering research, Nichols claimed to discover that 425 MHz was the exact critical resonant frequency required to directly interface with and manipulate the human mind, the central nervous system, and the biological functions of human consciousness. For anyone who has watched even a single episode of Stranger Things, this description will immediately evoke the haunting institutional image of the Hawkins National Laboratory. The stark, brutalist, completely windowless concrete architecture of the fictional laboratory in Indiana, surrounded by layers of barbed wire fences and armed guards, is visually and atmospherically a direct recreation of the real-world aesthetic of Camp Hero. According to the shocking public disclosures made by Nichols, the mundane military operations visible on the surface of Camp Hero were nothing more than an elaborate, carefully orchestrated front. He claimed that, beginning in the early 1970s, under the brilliant yet ruthless direction of an aging John von Neumann, a monumental subterranean city was excavated directly beneath the foundations of the base. This underground complex was rumored to extend down at least 12 distinct levels, carving an elaborate labyrinth of high-tech laboratories, secure living quarters, and reinforced holding cells deep into the bedrock of Long Island. Just like the subterranean levels of the Hawkins Laboratory, where dark, unethical scientific endeavors are hidden away from the peaceful town above. The lower levels of Camp Hero were designed to shield the outside world from the terrifying nature of the experiments taking place within. Nichols asserted that this entire operation was funded entirely outside the purview of the United States government, utilizing a massive, hidden cache of Nazi gold captured by elite American forces at the conclusion of World War II. This black budget funding allowed the project to operate with total immunity from congressional oversight. In Stranger Things, this historical concept is seamlessly mirrored through the inclusion of Project MKUltra, the real-world CIA mind control initiative, which serves as the structural justification for Dr. Martin Brenner's horrific psychic experiments on children, effectively bridging the gap between historical intelligence overreach and Nichols' paradigm of underground science. The absolute crown jewel of the subterranean research facility at Camp Hero was a highly advanced piece of anomalous technology that Preston Nichols famously labeled the Montauk Chair. This device was not a mechanical instrument in the traditional sense, but rather a profound, highly sensitive parapsychological and electronic interface. According to Nichols, the initial prototypes of the chair were engineered by the defense contracting giant International Telephone and Telegraph, universally known as ITT. The underlying technology was designed to intercept the subtle, faint electromagnetic thought patterns, emotional states, and bioelectric auras emanated by the human body, amplifying those signals electronically and translating them into highly structured digital computer code. The Montauk Chair was surrounded by a complex array of massive liquid helium-cooled superconducting coils and highly sensitive radio receivers, creating an electromagnetic environment remarkably similar to modern functional magnetic resonance imaging machines. To operate the system, the scientists required a highly gifted human subject, an individual possessing extraordinary, naturally occurring latent psychic, telepathic, or clairvoyant abilities. The primary, most famous medium utilized during the golden years of the project was a young man named Duncan Cameron, whose tragic and bizarre role in this conspiracy theory remains central to its entire structure. When Duncan Cameron was secured into the Montauk Chair and guided into a state of profound, Kunstlich-induced hypnotic trance, the sensitive, superconducting coils would pick up his thoughts. These amplified mental signals were then fed directly into the massive computational arrays of the base, which in turn modulated the immense broadcasting power of the 425 MHz and FPS 35 radar transmitter. The radar dish, therefore, functioned as a colossal, continental-scale psychological amplifier. Nichols explained that whatever Cameron visualized or thought while sitting in the chair would be broadcast across the region, allowing the scientists to perform terrifying feats of mass mind control. They could induce sudden, inexplicable waves of intense terror, profound euphoria, or debilitating paranoia across whole towns on Long Island, testing how the civilian population responded to invisible, technologically projected emotional frequencies. This extraordinary, highly specific concept of an engineered psychic amplifier provided the Duffer Brothers with the direct, undeniable inspiration for the character of 11 and the iconic sensory deprivation tank utilized within the Hawkins National Laboratory. When 11 is submerged into the dark, silent waters of the tank to maximize her telepathic reach, she is performing the exact functional role that Duncan Cameron performed while strapped into the Montauk Chair. Both subjects are placed into an altered state of consciousness, their heads adorned with complex arrays of monitoring electrodes and wires. Their natural latent psychic talents are technologically harnessed and violently amplified by teams of cold, calculating scientists who watch their every brainwave from behind a glass observation window. Furthermore, the operational objectives are identical in both narratives. Duncan Cameron was ordered by military handlers to use the amplified power of the chair to locate hidden Soviet submarines, intercept foreign intelligence transmissions, or mentally assassinate targets across the globe. This is a perfect reflection of how Dr. Brenner weaponizes 11, forcing her to project her consciousness across vast distances to spy on high-ranking Soviet military officials during the height of the Cold War. As the 1970s progressed, the experiments involving Duncan Cameron and the Montauk Chair underwent a radical, unexpected evolution that shattered the conventional boundaries of material physics. The scientists discovered that the amplification of Cameron's thoughts was so profound that it was no longer merely affecting the minds of those who received the signal. On one historic occasion, while Cameron was locked in a deep trance, he was instructed by the research directors to intensely visualize a physical object, such as a solid gold coin or a watch. To the utter amazement of the assembled technicians, as Cameron focused his immense mental energy, the object began to physically manifest out of thin air within the laboratory space. solidifying from pure energy into tangible matter. Recognizing that they had unlocked a technology capable of altering the very fabric of physical reality through human thought, the directors pushed the project into its most dangerous phase, the exploration of time and spatial dimensions. Nichols reported that in the year 1977, Cameron was instructed to visualize a doorway, a literal opening or rift within the temporal stream. The resulting surge of electromagnetic power from the radar dish cracked the space-time continuum wide open, creating a stable, physically traversable wormhole within the lower levels of the bunker, a phenomenon known as the Montauk Time Tunnel. This tunnel appeared to observers as a shimmering, rotating, highly luminous vortex. Anyone who stepped through this glowing gateway could travel to virtually any point in past or future history, or to completely different regions of the cosmos. According to Nichols' detailed memoirs, the shadow military authorities used this time tunnel to launch expansive, highly dangerous tactical missions. Elite reconnaissance teams were sent deep into the past to observe critical historical events, such as the battles of the American Civil War or the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, to analyze whether the timeline could be subtly manipulated. Even more astonishingly, Nichols asserted that the tunnel was used to teleport teams millions of miles through space to the surface of the planet Mars. There, beneath the red desert sands, the teams allegedly explored vast, abandoned subterranean cities and pyramids built by an ancient, long-extinct, extraterrestrial civilization, retrieving anomalous artifacts that were brought back through the portal and locked away in the secure vaults beneath Camp Hero. In the narrative architecture of Stranger Things, this terrifying temporal vortex becomes the literal spark that sets the entire series in motion. The massive bleeding rift that grows within the lowest level of the Hawkins laboratory is the direct creative descendant of Preston Nichols' time tunnel. Just as Cameron's mind tore a hole in the fabric of reality, Eleven's telepathic contact with an alien entity rips open a permanent dimensional gateway. However, instead of leading to the ancient past or the plains of Mars, the Hawkins portal opens a direct channel to the Upside Down, a decaying, toxic, mirrored dimension that exists parallel to our own. The narrative dynamics of exploration are identical. The scenes in Stranger Things, where soldiers clad in heavy, sealed hazard suits are lowered into the pulsing organic rift to collect soil samples and atmospheric data, are a striking visual homage to Nichols. Descriptions of the specialized research teams who stepped blindly into the glowing vortex of the Montauk Time Tunnel, completely uncertain of what alien terrors or temporal paradoxes awaited them on the other side. Beneath the veneer of scientific triumph and cosmic exploration that Nichols outlines in his books lay an unspeakably dark, profoundly tragic human cost. In order to continually calibrate, refine, and test the efficacy of the Montauk Chair and the dimensional portals, the administrators of the project required a steady, expendable supply of human test subjects. Because the entire operation was illegal, highly unethical, and deeply classified, the scientists could not rely on traditional military volunteers, medical students, or civilian recruits. To solve this logistical problem, the shadow government turned to a methodology that was as efficient as it was monstrous. Under the cover of darkness, specialized abduction squads systematically kidnapped hundreds, possibly thousands, of young boys. These children were carefully selected from the crowded streets, transit hubs and subway stations of major metropolitan areas along the East Coast, with a particular focus on New York City. The perpetrators targeted runaways, orphans, and homeless youths, children whose sudden disappearance would unlikely trigger massive media investigations or prolonged police interest. These stolen children became known within the annals of modern conspiracy lore as the Montauk Boys. Upon their forced arrival at the heavily fortified perimeter of Camp Hero, these boys were stripped of their identities, locked in small, sterile underground holding cells, and subjected to a brutal regimen of physical and psychological torture. The deliberate goal of this cruelty was to induce severe psychological dissociation, a process known in clandestine psychological warfare as depatterning. By systematically shattering the child's existing ego, personality, and memories through sensory deprivation, hallucinogenic drugs, and extreme electrical shocks, the handlers could completely erase their past identity. Once the child's mind was reduced to a completely blank slate, the scientists utilized the targeted electromagnetic frequencies of the Montauk Chair to hardwire a completely new set of behaviors, commands, and artificial memories deep into their subconscious minds. These children were transformed into perfect, highly programmable sleeper agents, their altered minds capable of performing advanced psychic tasks or acting as unquestioning, highly covert tools for the deep state. One of the most famous individuals to step forward alongside Nichols was a man named Stuart Swerdlow, who claimed to be a surviving Montauk boy. Swerdlow provided harrowing, deeply unsettling testimonies regarding the psychological re-engineering he endured, describing how his latent psionic and clairvoyant talents were artificially amplified through intense radiation, leaving him with lifelong psychological scars, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and profound emotional fragmentation. This harrowing narrative involving the systematic exploitation of the Montauk Boys forms the absolute emotional, moral, and structural core of Stranger Things. The stolen, heavily traumatized children, who are raised within the sterile, abusive confines of the Hawkins laboratory, ranging from number 1 all the way to number 11, are the direct, undeniable television equivalents of Preston Nichols' Montauk Boys. Like the victims of Camp Hero, these fictional children are stripped of their names, referred to only by numbers tattooed onto their wrists, and completely isolated from the warmth of human society. They are forced to live in cold, institutional cells and are subjected to grueling, psychologically abusive training exercises overseen by a manipulative, cold father figure whom they are conditioned to call Papa. The horrific transformation of innocent, vulnerable children into weaponized, telepathic tools of national security is the darkest, most profound thematic thread that binds the real-world conspiracy theory of Long Island to the global streaming phenomenon of the modern era. The secret activities of the Montauk Project reached a terrifying, apocalyptic crescendo in the early 1980s, culminating in a dramatic, violent collapse that reads like the ultimate cautionary tale of scientific hubris. By 1983, the underlying technological matrix of the project had become increasingly volatile. The constant tearing of the space-time continuum had introduced profound, unpredictable instabilities into the local environment, and a faction of high-ranking scientists within the facility began to experience profound moral crises, realizing that the unchecked manipulation of dimensions and mind control was pushing the planet toward a catastrophic reality collapse. This group of internal dissidents decided to orchestrate a sophisticated act of sabotage to shut the project down permanently from the inside. The fateful historical date of this collapse, according to the elaborate chronology established by Nichols, was August 12, 1983. On this specific night, a catastrophic, completely unprecedented temporal synchronization occurred. The immense electromagnetic fields generated by the Montauk Project in 1983 locked into a perfect, harmonic resonance with the original electromagnetic fields generated by the Philadelphia experiment exactly 40 years prior, on August 12, 1943. This dimensional alignment created a massive, unclosable temporal feedback loop that physically linked the USS Eldridge in the past directly to the subterranean laboratory of Camp Hero in the present. The massive generators began to overheat, electrical arcs danced across the laboratories, and control over the time tunnel was entirely lost. To force an immediate, permanent shutdown of the entire facility, the rebellious scientists triggered a deeply buried, highly covert post-hypnotic command that they had secretly hardwired into the subconscious mind of their star psychic, Duncan Cameron. While Cameron was strapped into the surging, spark-showering Montauk Chair, The handlers whispered the secret code word. Instantly, Cameron's fractured mind dived into the deepest, darkest recesses of his own evolutionary subconscious. He bypassed his conscious thoughts and tapped into his raw, primal animal fears, materializing a physical manifestation of his own psychological terrors out of pure energy. This entity came to be known in the literature as the beast from the ID, or simply the Montauk monster. This creature, described by Nichols as a colossal, towering, hair-covered reptilian monstrosity of unimaginable physical strength and malicious intent, materialized directly into the concrete laboratory space. The beast let out a deafening roar and began a violent, unstoppable rampage through the underground complex. It tore through solid, reinforced concrete walls, ripped heavy steel security doors from their hinges, and hunted the panicked, fleeing scientists through the labyrinthine corridors. The creature was completely immune to conventional firearms, as its physical form was constantly being projected and maintained by the immense power of the radar transmitter. Realizing that the monster could only be stopped by severing its energy source, Preston Nichols himself claimed that he bravely ran into the power control room and utilized a heavy fire axe to chop through the massive, high-voltage electrical cables feeding the Montauk Chair. As the power died, the radar transmitter went silent, the time tunnel collapsed, and the Montauk monster instantly vanished back into the ether of the subconscious mind. In the frantic days that followed, the military high command officially evacuated the base, poured thousands of tons of solid concrete into the elevator shafts to permanently seal the lower 12 levels, and subjected the surviving staff to intensive drug-induced memory wiping procedures to ensure absolute silence. This specific, dramatic climax from the summer of 1983 serves as the exact, literal blueprint for the unforgettable finale of the first season of Stranger Things. The beast from the ID, born entirely out of the subconscious terror of a traumatized psychic medium, is the creative genesis of the Demogorgon. In the television series, it is Eleven who, during a deep telepathic trance within the sensory deprivation tank, accidentally stumbles upon a terrifying, faceless, predatory creature lurking in the deep darkness of the mental void. Her sudden, absolute scream of pure terror acts as the energetic catalyst that tears the dimensional barrier open, allowing the Demogorgon to cross over physically into our world. The subsequent monster rampage through the corridors of the Hawkins National Laboratory, where the creature slaughtering the scientists and security guards is impervious to bullets, perfectly mirrors the destructive path of Nichols' Montauk monster. Remarkably, the historical year of the alleged collapse of the Montauk Project, the year 1983, is the exact, specific year chosen by the Duffer Brothers for the setting of their first season, with the fateful disappearance of Young, Will Byers occurring in November of that very same year. The fact that this incredibly elaborate, highly cinematic story managed to escape the fringes of Long Island folklore and achieve a permanent position within global pop culture is the direct result of a highly collaborative network of individuals who spent years validating, documenting, and expanding upon each other's claims. The most critical figure in this promotional network, second only to Nichols himself, was an author, researcher, and alternative publisher named Peter Moon, whose birth name is Vincent Barbaric. Moon possessed a sharp, intuitive understanding of narrative structure and recognized that Nichols' fragmented, highly chaotic engineering memoirs possessed the potential to become a literary sensation. In 1992, working closely with Nichols to translate his technical jargon and recovered memories into a coherent, highly suspenseful literary format, Moon published the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. Released under Moon's independent publishing house, Sky Books, the slim paperback became an immediate, massive underground success. It spread rapidly through independent bookstores, conspiracy conventions, and the early architecture of the internet, quickly achieving the status of a cult classic within the genres of ufology, alternative history, and conspiracy literature. The mythology expanded even further with the dramatic arrival of Bielek, an elderly man who stepped forward at a major UFO conference in the late 1980s after viewing a screening of the Hollywood film The Philadelphia Experiment. Bielek claimed that the movie had shattered a lifelong psychological block installed by the government, revealing that his true identity was Edward Cameron, the legitimate biological brother of the Montauk psychic, Duncan Cameron. Bielek delivered an even more extreme, mind-bending layer to the narrative. He asserted that on August 12, 1943, he and his brother had jumped off the deck of the disappearing USS Eldridge to escape the electromagnetic chaos. However, instead of falling into the chilly waters of Philadelphia Harbor, they fell through a temporal void, materializing 40 years later on the manicured lawns of Camp Hero in the summer of 1983. There, according to Bielek, they were greeted by an elderly, expectant John von Neumann, who informed them that they were caught in a temporal loop and had to travel back to 1943 to physically destroy the equipment on the ship, as the continuous connection between the two experiments was threatening to tear the planet apart. Throughout the 1990s, Nichols, Bielek, and the quiet, mysterious Duncan Cameron toured extensively across the United States and Europe, appearing as headline speakers at paranormal expositions, alternative science lectures, and UFO conventions. They presented their audiences with highly detailed, hand-drawn schematic diagrams of advanced psychotronics circuits, photographs of the rusting structures at Camp Hero, and elaborate technical explanations that sounded profoundly authentic to laymen. They built a passionate, highly dedicated global community of followers who looked at the heavily restricted fences, hidden ventilation shafts, and abandoned military bunkers of Long Island as the definitive, undeniable material proof of a massive, ongoing government cover-up. While the narrative of the Montauk Project remains an undeniably captivating, beautifully complex piece of modern folklore, it faces a completely devastating, insurmountable wall of criticism from mainstream historians, empirical scientists, and rational investigators. When subjected to rigorous objective scrutiny, the entire structural foundation of Preston Nichols' claims completely disintegrates into a mixture of historical inaccuracies, scientifically impossible premises, and psychological anomalies. To this day, despite decades of intense interest, there has never been a single page of authenticated documentation, a single piece of anomalous physical hardware, or a single verified photograph produced that substantiates the existence of any underground facility or paranormal experimentation at Camp Hero. One of the most profound and respected analyses of the Montauk phenomenon was conducted by the legendary computer scientist, astronomer, and ufologist Jacques Vallée. Investigative research into the timelines of the witnesses revealed a telling psychological pattern. The highly specific, world-altering memories of Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, and Stuart Swerdlow did not emerge naturally. Rather, they began to surface and gain narrative complexity immediately after. The individuals underwent highly controversial, suggestive therapeutic techniques, including regression hypnosis and guided imagery, designed to uncover repressed childhood traumas or alien abductions. From a modern psychiatric perspective, the Montauk Project stands as a textbook example of false memory syndrome on a societal scale. Within the isolated, highly reinforcing subculture of ufology and conspiracy conventions, these individuals took genuine technical terms from their real-world careers in electronics and seamlessly blended them with popular science fiction movie tropes and contemporary literature. In fact, a definitive, highly revealing piece of evidence regarding the narrative's authenticity is located within the text of the very first chapter of Nichols and Moon's seminal 1992 book. In an introductory note, explicitly designed to guide the reader, the authors themselves included a fascinating legal and narrative disclaimer. They openly admitted that a significant portion of the information presented should be categorized as soft facts, writing explicitly that while the book was being presented as a non-fiction account, the reader was entirely free to approach it as pure science fiction if that felt more comfortable or appropriate. Skeptics and legal analysts view this specific passage as a clever, highly calculated legal shield designed to protect the authors from potential fraud charges or deceptive marketing lawsuits. The verifiable historical and logistical data further exposes the impossibility of the narrative. The central assertion that a monumental underground metropolis stretching down 12 full levels was excavated beneath Camp Hero during the 1970s completely ignores the physical and social realities of eastern Long Island. Montauk was, and remains, a small, highly interconnected, observant community of local fishermen, tradespeople, and seasonal tourists. The logistical reality of constructing a 12-story subterranean base would require the continuous movement of thousands of heavy industrial dump trucks. Excavation and disposal of millions of tons of rocky soil and bedrock, and an unprecedented, highly visible influx of specialized concrete and construction personnel. It is historically impossible for an engineering project of that magnitude to occur without a single local resident noticing or documenting the monumental industrial footprint. Furthermore, the operational history of the USS Eldridge, the cornerstone of the entire Philadelphia connection, is a matter of public, fully verified historical record. The official naval logbooks, deck logs, and master communication records of the ship show that throughout the entire month of August 1943, the vessel was on a routine, highly peaceful shakedown and training cruise in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, nowhere near the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Following the conclusion of World War II, the ship was legally transferred to the nation of Greece under the Mutual Defense Assistance Act, where it served openly and honorably within the Greek Navy under the name Leon for several decades. Throughout its long conventional operational life, not a single Greek sailor or naval officer ever reported a single anomalous temporal phenomenon, vanishing event, or structural abnormality. The underlying physics championed by Preston Nichols are equally divorced from scientific reality. The core engineering claim that a standard SAGE radar system operating at 425 MHz can warp the space-time continuum, create physical wormholes, or manifest thoughts into solid matter violates the most fundamental, unyielding laws of thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, and electromagnetic theory. The NFPS-35 radar was undeniably an incredibly powerful high-energy broadcasting system, and when it was active during the Cold War, its massive electromagnetic pulses did occasionally cause minor, highly annoying interference in local civilian television sets, radios, and primitive hearing aids. However, these disruptions were the result of simple, well-understood radio frequency interference, not the manifestation of psychotronics or dimensional manipulation. Despite the absolute lack of empirical validity, the spectacular mythology crafted by Preston Nichols has achieved a profound, permanent victory within the global cultural imagination. The story possesses a brilliant, almost hypnotic psychological architecture that targets the specific anxieties of the modern era, a deep-seated distrust of the government agencies, a profound fear of invisible technological surveillance and manipulation, and an eternal, burning fascination with the hidden boundaries of our universe. When Camp Hero was officially decommissioned and abandoned by the military in the late 1980s, the land was eventually transferred to the New York State Park System, opening to the public as the Camp Hero State Park. Today, thousands of tourists, hikers, and urban explorers routinely walk down the abandoned asphalt roads of the base, photograph the massive rusted radar dish from behind security barriers, and peer into the barred windows of the decaying barracks. Yet the persistent presence of high chain-link fences, ominous no trespassing signs, and active environmental monitoring equipment continues to fuel the imaginations of conspiracy theorists. Visitors frequently post videos claiming to hear strange, rhythmic, low-frequency hums emanating from deep within the ground, experiencing sudden, unexplained compass malfunctions, or remaining firmly convinced that the underground city was never truly abandoned, but simply reactivated by an elite, shadowy corporate entity operating entirely in secret. The absolute cultural triumph of the Montauk Project, however, occurred far away from the windy cliffs of Long Island, manifested within the creative writing rooms of modern entertainment. In 2014, two young, highly ambitious independent filmmakers named Matt and Ross Duffer, collectively known to the entertainment industry as the Duffer Brothers, began conceptualizing a new, highly nostalgic television series that would pay homage to the classic supernatural cinema of the 1980s. When they sat down to write their original pilot script, they did not invent the narrative elements out of thin air. Instead, their entire original pitch book was directly, explicitly lifted from the pages of Preston Nichols and Peter Moon's conspiracy books. The original official working title of the television series was not Stranger Things. It was simply titled Montauk. In this initial creative draft, which the Duffer Brothers used to pitch the show to various major television networks and streaming platforms, the setting was not a fictional town in Indiana, but rather the real world, wind-swept landscape of Montauk Point, Long Island, in the year 1980. The plot was designed to treat the claims of Preston Nichols as a factual, historical premise. The series was designed to explore the local legends of missing children, the secret underground laboratories beneath Camp Hero, and the terrifying accidental release of a monstrous creature born out of a psychic medium's mind. Due to a series of practical production challenges, tax incentives, and logistical considerations during early pre-production, the producers ultimately made the decision to shift the physical filming location to the state of Georgia. To accommodate this change, they altered the setting to the fictional, landlocked town of Hawkins, Indiana, and rebranded the series under the evocative title Stranger Things. Yet, despite this cosmetic geographic relocation, the genetic blueprint and narrative core of the worldwide mega-hit remain entirely unchanged from the Montauk Project. Every single time millions of viewers across the globe sit down to watch 11 submerge into a tank, marvel at the terrifying biology of the Demogorgon, or watch military scientists in hazard suits explore a pulsing, dimensional rift, they are consuming the modernized, highly polished, cinematic translation of the exact, bizarre experiences that an eccentric Long Island electronics collector spent his life preaching as absolute historical truth. When one steps back to view the life's work of Preston Nichols and the sprawling, reality-bending epic of the Montauk Project in its entirety, a profoundly complex and ambiguous portrait emerges. For his dedicated circle of supporters, alternative researchers, and conspiracy theorists, Nichols was a heroic, deeply courageous insider, a brilliant whistleblower who risked his personal safety, mental stability, and reputation to expose a horrific lattice of technological overreach and human rights abuses that the global population is intellectually unprepared to fully accept. For the rational scientific community and mainstream historians, he was a master storyteller, an eccentric, highly imaginative technician who masterfully wove the profound paranoias, secret intelligence programs, and radar technologies of the Cold War into a highly lucrative, enduringly popular literary franchise. Yet regardless of where one chooses to draw the definitive line between factual reality and elaborate science fiction, the Montauk Project remains an undeniably brilliant monument to modern mythmaking. It serves as a fascinating, highly illuminating case study in how technical jargon, abandoned military infrastructure, and the deepest, most primal psychological fears of a society confuse together to create a contemporary legend that possesses the power to span decades and influence global art. Preston Nichols may have passed into history, but the ideas he manufactured have achieved a form of narrative immortality, living on within the minds of millions of television fans, writers, and explorers. When the Atlantic wind whistles through the rusting skeletal framework of the monumental and FPS 35 radar dish at Camp Hero on a fog-shrouded evening, the boundary between the past and the present, the real and the imagined, seems to dissolve entirely, leaving us face to face with the infinite, terrifying, and beautiful creative capacity of human imagination and its deepest underlying fears.